Hello, I'm John McBride, and thank you for joining me to talk about visiting Yamaguchi City. These four photographs are iconic sites in Yamaguchi. Bottom left is Rurikoji Temple, which we'll visit. Bottom right is the famous Kintai Bridge in Iwakuni, and I suggest you drop by on the bullet train when you're making your way down to Shin Yamaguchi Station. Top right is the Hagi streetscape, which we'll visit, and the top left is the famous Motonosumi Shrine, which is a little bit more difficult to get to. Yamaguchi prospered under the Ouchi clan in the 14th to 16th centuries. The Ouchi saw a similarity between the basin over which their mountain castle looked and the basin of Kyoto. You can see Kyoto's basin, the bottom right photograph there. It's surrounded on three sides by mountains, as is Yamaguchi Basin. With their wealth, the Ouchi created a city in Kyoto's image. This wealth was derived from trade with China. This is the content of my talk. First, we'll look at access to Yamaguchi and Hagi. Second, we'll examine the great Muromachi period city created by the founding clan, the Ouchi family. Third, we'll look at the powerful Mori clan who defeated the Ouchi and controlled all of the Chugoku area from their base in Hiroshima. They were then defeated themselves at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and were not only forced back into the smaller area of today's Yamaguchi, but also forced to establish a new capital for themselves in the fishing village of Hagi on the far side of the province. Fourth, the Mori family finally took their revenge after 260 years when they plotted the downfall of the shogunate and their return to Yamaguchi City. Fifth, Yamaguchi revolutionaries made up most of the new Meiji government, Ito Hirobumi becoming Japan's first prime minister. He was born in Hagi. And last, we look at poets among the careerists of Yamaguchi, in particular, Taneda Santoka and Nakahara Chuya, and the literature of hot springs. First, location. Now, Yamaguchi sits at the western tip of the Chugoku region of the main island of Japan, Honshu. Chugoku literally means the middle counties and refers to its position between Kyushu, which was the food bowl of Kyoto in the southwest, and the capital region of Kyoto and Nara. Yamaguchi is reached on the bullet train, 4.5 hours from Tokyo. You might plan a quick side trip to Hiroshima or Iwakuni, as I mentioned, to see Kintai Bridge. And then one change to a local train at Shin Yamaguchi is required. Now, Shin Yamaguchi is a fun bullet train station to wait at. Not many bullet trains stop here, so it's only a few minutes before the next express passes through at full speed while you're waiting for your train. And I always find this a lot of fun. Now, we should review some of the geography-based vocabulary I'll be using tonight. The east of Honshu is where Tokyo, today's capital, is located, known as Edo until 1868. The Tokugawa shoguns ruled Japan from here with a military government from 1603 to 1867. The Ouchi controlled the Yamaguchi area during the Muromachi period, 14th to 16th centuries, but were removed by the Mori during the Warring States period of the 16th century. At the beginning of the Edo period, the Mori were not only confined to the Yamaguchi area when it was renamed the Choshu domain, but had to move their capital from the convenient Yamaguchi city across to the other side of the Chugoku Mountains to the small village of Hagi, which I think was known as Matsumoto at the time. The Mori would never forgive this slight, and 260 years later, they would form an alliance with the Shimazu clan of the Satsuma domain, today's Kagoshima, and go to war with and cause the downfall of the Tokugawa shogunate. So let's begin with the founding of the city by the Ouchi, great Muromachi period warriors. The city is protected by this statue of Ouchi Hiroyo, who was the first of the Ouchi clan to bring his residence down from the mountains onto the flats of the basin. He built the Ouchi mansion in the bottom of the basin. Now, family mythology states that the clan is descended from Korean Bakje royalty. This statue is in the grounds of Yamaguchi's most significant landmark, Rurikoji Temple, which we'll visit shortly. The Ouchi were powerful during the 14th to 16th centuries, what we refer to as the Muromachi period of Japan. Muromachi Japan was ruled from Kyoto by the Ashikaga warrior dynasty. Hiroyo's son distinguished himself by resolving or helping to resolve a dispute between two branches of the imperial family at the beginning of the Muromachi period, otherwise known as the short-lived Nambokucho period, or the Southern and Northern Courts period. Unfortunately, the son refused the Ashikaga shogun's demand to build an expensive mansion in Kyoto, which would have kept the clan impoverished at home, and as a result, he was required to commit suicide. Now, just to recap, the ninth leader moved the family home down from a mountain castle to the flats of the city. His son excelled in assisting the Ashikaga shogunate, but then sadly was required to commit suicide. And then his younger brother, Moriharu, the 11th generation, had the Rurikoji pagoda built in his brother's honor, although the temple was not called Rurikoji at the time. The family's crest on the left is known as the Ouchi Hishi, or Ouchi water chestnut, beautifully surrounded by defensive protrusions. They're a true samurai family crest. The 14th generation, Masahiro, fought in the Onin War, which brought the Muromachi period to an end and started the Warring States period. He sided against the powerful Hosokawa family. He invited one of Japan's most famous painters, Sesshu, to live in Yamaguchi in 1486. The 15th generation saw Yamaguchi securing exclusive access to Chinese ports after a clash with the Hosokawa in China, and this led to great riches for the clan. And the 16th generation saw the magnificence of the Ouchi's control peak. The clan was culturally open to many international influences at this time, even housing the Jesuit priest Francis Xavier. They overstepped their station when they attempted to remove the emperor and indeed the capital from Kyoto to Yamaguchi. They would not recover from this disaster, being defeated from within, basically by retainers who disagreed with the attack on the imperial lineage. Now let's return to Hiroyo, the 9th generation. Remember, the one who brought his castle down to the flatlands. Today, his Ouchi Yakata, or Ouchi mansion site, is occupied by Ryufukuji Temple. The old castle walls are still clearly visible around the temple site. The west gate to this flat-style castle has been reconstructed, and the original strolling gardens within the castle grounds have also been carefully reconstructed. And the the dry moat and earthenworks have been restored as part of this careful archaeological work. You can see the careful archaeological work that's gone on to recreate these spaces. The Ichinosaka River flows through the center of Yamaguchi, and just on the northern side of the river is Rurikoji Temple and its famous five-storied pagoda, looking out over the city and guarding it. It is indeed the symbol of the city. The pagoda is a national treasure and is one of the greatest extant Muromachi period structures in Japan. It was built in 1442, by the 11th Lord Moriharu in honor of his older brother Yoshihiro, following Yoshihiro's tragic suicide. The roof is made from deep layers of cypress bark, and the eaves get narrower as the structure gets higher. It is in a mixture of Japanese Daibutsu-yo and Chinese Zen-style architecture, which was a popular mix during the preceding Kamakura period. The gardens are a joy in any season: spring, autumn, and winter. And every night, the structure is lit up here in early winter with protective ropes already in place to protect each and every branch of the pine trees against heavy snowfall. This sculptural seasonal work in the garden is called yukizuri. Rurikoji's temple's pagoda is known as one of the three great pagodas of Japan. Now, a pagoda is traditionally the most important structure in a Buddhist temple garan, or precinct, modeled after Buddha's upturned begging bowl and walking staff. The building contains usually a relic of Buddha, some hair or bone, a tooth perhaps. In Japan, there are some relics that exist, but mostly a piece of crystal represents the crystal clear clarity of Buddha's consciousness, and it's enclosed in the structure that you see on the very top of the pagoda. And the other two great pagodas of Japan are at Horyuji Temple in Nara, constructed in 607. In fact, the oldest wooden structure in the world, made from extremely strong cypress, and Kyoto's Daigoji Temple, constructed in 951, which is today Kyoto's oldest extant building. Rurikoji was actually moved here in 1690 by the Mori clan. You remember I said it was called something different when the Ouchi built it. It was originally known as Koshakuji Temple. But when the Mori were forced to move their capital from Yamaguchi to Hagi in the Edo period, they took Koshakuji Temple with them. And this site was then occupied by Rurikoji Temple, which was moved from Hiroshima. The temple's principal image is a statue of the medicine Buddha, Yakushi Nyorai. Its honorific mountain name, you can see in large characters there, Honei-zan, meaning to, I guess, to protect peacefully. The mountain name is always displayed most prominently on the front gate in the Chinese style. And on the left-hand side, in smaller characters, you can see the name Rurikoji. And the fact that it is a Soto sect Zen temple. And on the right side, it says the head temple of the sect is Eiheiji Temple, deep in the mountains of Fukui Prefecture. The next important structure in a Japanese temple garan compound is the hondo, or main hall of worship. In front of the main hall are a giant wooden rice scoop and wooden pestle. And these symbolize the merciful heart of Buddha and Buddha's commitment to wear himself out, scooping people up to save them. Also in the grounds, Also in the grounds is a statue of Toyo Sesshu. Now, Toyo Sesshu was Japan's most prominent master of ink and wash painting from the mid-Muromachi period. He was born in western Okayama in 1420 to a samurai family. And as a child, he undertook Zen training. He started drawing and continued his art and religious studies at the Zen temple Shokokuji in Kyoto. Shokokuji is just north of the Imperial Palace in Kyoto and is one of the 5 main Zen temples of Kyoto. Wonderful place to stroll around. He spent 20 years in Kyoto before traveling to Yamaguchi, where he established his atelier Unkoku-an at the age of 40. He started to call himself Sesshu, or snowboat, at this time. Under the patronage of the Ouchi, he traveled on a trading mission to China in 1468, where he perfected his ink brush painting skills. He returned to Yamaguchi in 1469, but could not stay there because of the Onin rebellion in Kyoto. And so he settled in Oita, Kyushu for a while, but returned to Yamaguchi and his Unkoku-an in 1486, where many of his masterpieces were created. He died in 1506 at the age of 87 at the Unkoku-an retreat. It's possible to visit his Unkoku-an hut, which is about 500 meters from Rurikoji Temple. It's just visible. The narrow path is easily missed. And when you find the place, you can sit for a while inside and imagine the works created here. His best known works were made later in life. This one in 1486, in his first year of final return to Yamaguchi in the Unkoku-an retreat. His work is heavily influenced by Song dynasty paintings, but with more pronounced contrast between light and shadow. You see thicker, heavier lines and a flatter effect of space. This work here is actually part of a long landscape scroll today held in the collection of the Mori family in the Mori Museum. Now, the Mori Museum is worth a visit. It opened in Hofu, which is the coastal port of Yamaguchi City in 1966. And it occupies part of the former Mori clan main residence, dating from the Meiji and Taisho periods, post-Edo period. And the buildings are registered cultural assets. Hofu is the port city of Yamaguchi. It sits on the inland sea of Japan. It's about 20 kilometers or just 30 minutes by car from Rurikoji. And the museum's gardens are also well regarded. Now, this work is in the Tokyo National Museum from 1470. It's perhaps one of Sesshu's most well-recognized works. You see the shades of gray used in high contrast. The darkest brushstrokes are far from value from the smattering of white areas. The image conveys a sense that we're actually outside in that cold. It's not a snow scene enjoyed from the fireside, but rather a hard, icy mountain ridge. Lines are choppy and jagged, not organic. It gives the work a sense of energy. And one line even threatens the Buddhist monastery. This is perhaps a cliff. We identify with the small figure struggling along in the cold on his way up the pilgrim's path to the monastery. This work from 1495, View of Mount Haboku, is in the Tokyo National Museum, a far more abstracted work, but brilliant in composition. I hope you agree. Huike, offering his arm to Bodhidharma from 1496, was also completed in Yamaguchi. When Bodhidharma, the story goes, the first patriarch of Zen Buddhism, was meditating facing a rock wall in Shaolin temple, the monk Huike came and asked to be accepted as his disciple. When Bodhidharma rejected the young priest, Huike chopped off his left arm to prove his firm determination to the master. Now, also in Rurikoji temple grounds is this quotation by Shiba Ryotaro, and my translation is, Choshu has a fine pagoda. And he goes on, I recall fondly the kindness of the people of Choshu. To understand them, one must understand the great Ouchi culture, to know the work of Ouchi Hiroyo, who created the grid-like streets of his new city, emulating the capital, Kyoto, and Ouchi Yoshitaka, who protected the Jesuit priest, Xavier. Now, Shiba Ryotaro is particularly famous for his serialized writing, including Ryoma ga Iku, which has sold 24 million copies. Volume 1 of 4 is available in translation on Kindle. You might know the story. Ryoma starts out as a member of the Sonno Joi faction, revere the emperor and expel the foreign barbarian faction. But gradually, he realizes that how much stronger other foreign countries have grown during Japan's 2 centuries of national seclusion. So he brokers an alliance between the Mori of Yamaguchi and the Shimazu of Kagoshima, which then leads to the downfall of the Edo shogunate in 1867. On the highways from which our quote was taken, Kaido or Yuku was serialized for 25 years in the weekly Asahi newspaper. Now, quickly, some of his other historical novels translated into English include a description of the life of the last shogun of the Edo period, the Russo-Japanese War, a fascinating look at the life of the priest Kukai, who introduced esoteric Buddhism to Japan, and the interactions of Japan and China in the 17th century. Also in the grounds of Rurikoji are 2 important late Edo period buildings. So we're jumping ahead here to the end of the Edo period. This one is Rosando Tea House, built in 1863, after Mori Takachika returned Yamaguchi's capital from Hagi back to Yamaguchi City. This was in April 1863. So we should just quickly review the Mori family's control of Yamaguchi before returning to discuss our tea house here. So we've moved ahead to the end of the Muromachi period, the last 100 years of which were known as the Warring States period through the 16th century. The most famous of the Mori family was the 12th generation leader, Mori Motonari. He used war, marriage, adoption, assassination to control all of the Chugoku region, including the defeat of his enemies, our Ouchi clan of Yamaguchi. And so he brought an end to the Ouchi line. Motonari's family crest was the wonderful Ichimonji Mitsuboshi crest, the long flat line meaning first among many, and the 3 dots referring to stars, which were good luck symbols for warriors. The next generations of interest are 14th and 15th generations Terumoto and Hidenari. Terumoto was on the losing side at the Great Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, and the victorious Tokugawa stripped him of his position. The 15th Hidenari was pushed further away to Yamaguchi and even refused his capital in Yamaguchi, being forced across to the other side of the province to create a new castle town in the sleepy fishing village of Hagi. This was in 1604. This was actually despite both major Mori-related troop battalions defecting to the Tokugawa side at the Battle of Sekigahara, and this betrayal would never be forgiven. Takachika was the last daimyo of Choshu, and he moved his capital back to Yamaguchi in April 1863, from where he could better coordinate the planning of the downfall of the Edo shogunate, and for which the two buildings I'm about to introduce were used. After the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate, three generations became dukes and peers in the upper house of the new Meiji government. And just to quickly finish, the current heir works for Sumitomo Metals. We see him here on the left there, Motohide, at this rather extraordinary meeting of the heirs of the Tokugawa family on the right and the two families responsible for their downfall, the Shimazu in the middle there, from Kagoshima, and the Mori. So back to our tea house. So we now know that Takachika returned the capital from Hagi to Yamaguchi in April 1863. It would be another 4 years before he successfully caused the Tokugawa shogunate to collapse. He built his administrative office at the site of today's prefectural office, and the Rozan tea room was at the back of that building in the foothills of Ichirozan Mountain. He would then invite clan members of all ranks for tea ceremonies to conspire against the shogunate, and his strength was taking on all viewpoints from many strata in his society. Rosando has an impressive tea garden built when it was first moved to this location in 1891. The second structure is perhaps even more important. It's also protected now in the grounds of Rurikoji Temple. It is the Chinryute, or the house of water flowing past one's pillow. It was originally used as the Mori's honjin, or official accommodation, when they traveled from Hagi across the Hagi Okan Highway and spent the night in Yamaguchi, before making their way by boat up to Osaka and then onwards by land on the Tokaido to Edo. It was originally located along the Ichinosaka River, as its name indicates. And we'll visit the Ichinosaka River in a moment. Now, Chinryute is where an alliance between the Satsuma and Choshu clans was finally agreed. The Sacho alliance, established here in September 1867, would go on to almost immediately defeat the Tokugawa shogunate within just a few months. The new Meiji government would be formed the following year, 1868, with senior members coming from the group who met here at Chinryute. Next, we visit, or we travel back in time to the rule of the Ouchi and the 14th generation, Masahiro, who invited the artist Sesshu to live in Yamaguchi from 1486. Now, Masahiro commissioned Sesshu to design the back garden at Joeiji Temple. And the mid-century modern landscape architect Shigemori Mirei would be commissioned in 1968 to design the front garden. Joeiji is about 2.7 kilometers northeast of Rurikoji, and while it's off many tourist maps, it is a must visit with an appreciation of the history of the city. It's a Zen temple. The garden is a large strolling garden, over 3,000 square meters, with borrowed views from the surrounding forest and mountains, providing an expansive feeling. There is a waterfall in the northeast, important for feng shui cleansing, and a central pond in the shape of the Chinese character for heart. The inner garden features standing stones, which are distinctive features of Muromachi gardens. Sesshu used water and rock to create one of his two-dimensional ink paintings in 3 dimensions. The shape of the pond is in the Chinese character for heart. To the northeast are protective Buddhist halls and the purifying waterfall in this demon's quarter in feng shui. The inner garden is a dry rock garden. Here, through the hardness or the will of the rocks, along with the lines and angles of the garden, does the garden become reminiscent of one of Sesshu's sansui or mountain water paintings. This is that inner garden. The stones are stood high and could be lifted from a Sesshu painting. We can sit on the balcony of the main worship hall and enjoy the view. A strolling path takes us between a bamboo forest, providing a softening effect to Sesshu's hard-edged stone inner garden. We pass a mound dedicated to Sesshu's painting brushes, which were so important that they were afforded their own grave. And then down alongside the dry, purifying waterfall to views back towards the main temple buildings. The front garden of Joeiji is a contemporary design. It is called Nammei-te, designed by Shigemori Mirei. Nammei means the Great Sea to the south. Now, the story is quite interesting. Shigemori was approached by the 20th abbot of Joeiji Temple, Yasuda Tenzan. Shigemori was truly the most knowledgeable expert in the 20th century about traditional Japanese gardens. And the abbot asked if Shigemori could make a garden, but it was not allowed to be better than Sesshu's. And Shigemori understandably declined the strange request, but the abbot was relentless, pleading with Shigemori to use all his skills to make a great yet inferior garden compared to Sesshu. Finally, in 1968, at the age of 72, Shigemori agreed. The theme of the garden is the ocean, where Sesshu crossed to reach Ming China under the patronage of the Ouchi. Stones are laid out in an organic cross form, and the moss mountains are piled higher, as you see, closer to the main hall. On the edges, they have a low, wavy pattern. And in this way, the viewer from the high platform of the main hall has a bird's eye view of out over the Southern Ocean. This in the autumn light. Next, we visit central Yamaguchi. It's Park Road and Ichinosaka River. Now, Park Road extends from the old prefectural government office through parklands containing important cultural institutions. And the park, you can just see, is bordered by the Ichinosaka River to the east. It provides very pleasant strolling or bike riding. The old prefectural government main building is now the Archives Museum. This building was completed in 1916 with architectural staff who would go on to collaborate on the design of the National Diet building in Tokyo, the National Parliament. It was designated an important cultural property in 1984, and it is one of the best examples of Taisho era architecture, being this blend of traditional Japanese and modern Western styles. The facade is reminiscent of Romantic Western architecture with a central raised roof section and two wings stretching out each side, emphasizing the horizon. It preserves a sense of dignity, gravity, refinement. The finer interior details made full use of traditional Japanese motifs alongside the most recent Western developments of the 1910s. In particular, the decorations on the ceiling of the main rooms and the curvature used in finishings add an enduring and quiet presence. This is the National Diet Building, completed in 1936 in central Tokyo. The Diet Building was made purely from Japanese construction materials, except for a few items, such as stained glass, for example. On the western side of Park Road is a church dedicated to the visit and stay of the first Jesuit to arrive in Japan, Francis Xavier. This was the original structure, now replaced. It was built in 1952 for the 400th anniversary of Francis Xavier's death. It was built on land secured with the help of the famous poet Nakahara Chuya's family, who were devout Catholics. We'll meet Chuya in a moment. It was Romanesque in style with these two towers, but unfortunately it burned down in 1991. Francis Xavier was born in Basque country, today's Spain. He studied theology in Paris, and his colleague or companion formed the Jesuits. And he resided in Yamaguchi in 1550 from October to December over Christmas. He then went to try to meet with the emperor, failed, and returned to Yamaguchi to preach in March 1551. Now, today's Francis Xavier Memorial Church was rebuilt in April 1998 with donations from local Catholics. You see two towers which reflect the design of the original building, and the new design has motifs of light and water. As I mentioned, Xavier celebrated Christmas in Yamaguchi, and so Yamaguchi is actually seen as the birthplace of Christmas celebrations in Japan. Many initially followed his teachings, but would be persecuted through the Edo period. Some actually maintained their faith and became hidden Christians, or kakure Christian, and their graves are found around Mount Shibuki in Hagi City. Next, we visit the Ichinosaka River. The river is lined with cherries. We'll read a poem about them shortly. Alongside the river, you'll find the wonderful Kosetsuen. They're tea sellers, very famous in Yamaguchi. But the younger generation, who still refine Japanese green tea, are actually also very good coffee roasters as well. Kosetsu is actually a bean goose. So the bean, geese, and snow garden is the literal meaning of the name. Very pleasant place to stop for a coffee. Now, Park Road ends at the main covered shopping avenue of Yamaguchi, which is in the old rice store town. So it's called Komeya, or rice stores. On one of the street corners at the beginning of the arcade is another fine coffee roaster called Log Coffee Roasters. You can see I do enjoy my coffee breaks when walking around Japanese cities. Okay, nearby is the important Jippo-te. Jippo-te is the detached residence of the Bandai family. The Bandai family ran a soy sauce business here, established in 1790, which is the mid-Edo period. When the capital of Yamaguchi was moved from Hagi back to Yamaguchi City, the Bandai family began to offer lodgings for retainers of the Choshu domain who were plotting the downfall of the shogunate. In particular, the very successful third generation, Bandai Rihei, hosted many who worked to overthrow the shogunate and restore imperial rule, including Ito Hirobumi, the first prime minister of Japan. Now, Rihei himself flourished because he had merchant accreditation from the domain and the shogunate. He was also director of a Koshinigata financial cooperative, which the domain relied on to build up its financial strength so it could go to battle with the shogunate. The complex comprises the main Bandai family home and the detached residence Jippote. And in between these two structures is the Sugi Shijuku, which was a school for revolutionary thought. The name Jippote was given by a visiting Confucian scholar, Japanese Confucian scholar, and it's a play on the Bandai family's trademark kameya, or the turtle house. The play is on the oracle turtle shell from the Book of Change, I Ching, an ancient Chinese divination text. The home is typical Japanese architecture with sliding doors that can be removed to create entertaining spaces of various sizes, or a breezeway in summer. Next door is the Sugi Shijuku, a private school for revolutionary thought. Now, the Sugi Shijuku was established by the biological elder brother of Yoshida Shoin, who we'll meet in Hagi. Now, Shoin School for Revolutionary Thought in Hagi saw many of the leaders of the new Meiji government pass through it, and they would continue their studies here at Sugi School after Yoshida's execution. And then to the main Bandai home at the back of the estate with its impressive garden, indeed fit for entertaining the warrior class. Next, we visit Yuda Hot Springs, about 2.5 kilometers west of Yamaguchi. The journey takes 3 minutes on the local train, or perhaps a half-hour walk. Yuda Onsen could be considered the entertainment district of Yamaguchi and the accommodation area for tourists, with many small bars and restaurants, as well as most of the city's hotel accommodation. Yuda literally means hot water in the rice paddies, and the source of the springs was discovered 600 years ago, and 2,000 tons of boiling mineral waters still bubble forth from the rice paddies. A statue of a white fox greets you at Yuda Onsen Station. Another name for Yuda Onsen is Byakko no Yu, or the White Fox Hot Springs. This is because the foundation myth is that a priest from Mount Gongen in central Yuda saw a white fox coming to take the waters each evening, and he realized that they were healing waters. Today, the town is known for its 7 foot baths, which are spread through the town and are free of charge. They're fun to visit. There are 5 main locations, this one being outside the Tourist Information Center on the left there. So once you've got your tourism information, you can soak your feet for 5 minutes. This one at Inoue Park, which is really very pleasant at night. And this one at the local community center. So it's always full of boisterous locals who are just dying to have a chat with you. So let's address the concept of onsen literature and Yamaguchi's 2 famous poets, Taneda Santoka and Nakahara Chuya. Now, just near the community center footspa is a monument dedicated to Taneda Santoka. And the interps board next to the monument, I'll translate for you. It says, "The wandering poet Taneda Santoka loved alcohol and travel, and he especially loved Yuda Hot Springs. In 1932, at the age of 51, he settled in a small grass hut called Kochuan in Ogori town, 12 kilometers from Yuda. He would often walk the 12 kilometers to visit Yuda Hot Springs. Kochuan was damaged by rain and wind, and in 1938, he moved to Yuda itself. He found a small hut next to Ryusenji Temple in the middle of town. He named his new hut Furai-kyo, meaning blown here by the wind. He continued a life of drinking, poetry, and travel. One of his humorous poems is Chimpoko mo ososo mo waite afureru yu. And this is the poem monument you see here. And it's a humorous poem. I'll translate it poorly as men's and women's private parts all boil in the gushing hot waters. He's a little bit more explicit with his description of men's and women's private parts. But the poem has Zen connotations. Humans are stripped to their nakedness and are being boiled in the hot waters. Now, Taneda Santoka, his birth name was Shoichi, 1882 to 1940. He is Japan's most famous free-form haiku poet. He was born down in Hofu, the port city I introduced. In 1892, his mother dies, and he reports that all enjoyable memories from childhood cease at that moment, understandably. In 1897, he starts writing haiku in earnest. He graduates as dux of his school, and he goes to the famous Waseda University Literature Department in 1902. But he returns ill 2 years later. His father's a disaster. He purchases a sake brewery, which fails, and all of the family's assets and home have to be sold. He marries at the age of 29 and has a son. Now, you already know Hofu, Yamaguchi's port city, and his statue guards the station here, so perhaps consider dropping by, although there is a similar statue at Shin Yamaguchi bullet trains, and you will definitely pass through this station, so get out at the station and pay your respects at this statue. Just in front of Hofu Station is his location of his birth home. Today, it's just a memorial and rest place. In 1911, he's writing for a local literature magazine. He's publishing standard haiku under the pen name Tanishiko, and he's translating foreign literature under the pen name Santoka. Now, tanishi is a kigo, or seasonal word in Japanese poetry. It means a river snail, and it's the kigo, or seasonal word for spring, because this is when the snails come to the surface in the river flats and move around in the spring. In 1913, Santoka is the only name he uses for his pen name. Now, in 1916, his family is bankrupt, his father goes missing, and Santoka moves to Kumamoto with his wife. His younger brother commits suicide, and Santoka becomes even more dependent on alcohol. He divorces his wife, and he moves to Tokyo. He meets with the disastrous earthquake, which destroys Edo in 1923. He's arrested by the military police for suspicion of being a communist. After being released from Sugamo prison, he escapes and goes to Kumamoto in Kyushu, and he undertakes odd jobs at a temple. And then in 1925, he leaves the temple and begins traveling Western Japan. And during these travels, he pens this poem in 1930 at Miyazaki en route, begging for alms. And the poem is Mattaku kumo ga nai kasa o nugi. Not a single cloud, I take my hat off. Now, this was published in his Gyokoki, or Journal of Begging for Alms. It was accompanied by prose, and my translation is, what a clear blue autumn sky, the beauty of nature, autumn, 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 is good for the heart and soul. So after this perhaps more positive period, at the age of 50, he started living at Gochuan. But he's not well physically and mentally, and unfortunately he attempts suicide. Now, Gochuan is just near the Shin Yamaguchi Shinkansen station. and he'd walk up to Yuda Onsen regularly. Now, his hermitage has been preserved, so it's worth a visit, although, as you see, the thatched roof has been covered in protective tin, which is quite common. And it was here that he penned this poem in June 1933. It was an unusually dry, rainy season and a hot day. The breeze came from the back of his hut, and the butterfly entered the hut on the breeze. The poem is dynamic and light. He attempts to capture the scene in words, and free-form haiku is particularly adept to this purpose. Now, he's writing in sort of almost pre-modern Japanese text. So for those of you who can read hiragana, you might be a little bit confused, but that first line, beautifully penned, you might recognize tefu, tefu, but it's pronounced chocho, or butterfly. Chocho, urakara omote e, hira hira. And you can almost see the butterfly flitting through the home in his calligraphy, which is one reason why I've used his calligraphy there. My translation is butterfly, from the back door to the front door, flutter, flutter. So I'd argue that his calligraphy is as important as the sounds of the words. In his brushstrokes and onomatopoeia, you can almost see the butterfly flying through his home. He begins traveling northern Japan in the footsteps of Matsuo Basho, the father of haiku poetry. I've done this as well, so I'm a bit of a fan of Santoka. And then he lives at Furai-kyo in Yuda Hot Springs from 1938, and he dies in 1940. So we'll finish with one final poem. The poem monument is back on the Ichinosaka River. I mentioned the cherry trees. The poem is Oitomashite hazakura no kage ga nagaku suzushiku. And my very poor translation is, with spare time on my hands, the cherry trees in full leaf provide shade a while longer. Now, the best reference on Santoka is the Life and Zen haiku poetry of Santoka. It's available on Kindle, and it's translated by William Scott Wilson, who many of you know, William Scott Wilson's book on the Nakasendo. Now, also in Yuda Onsen is the Nakahara Chuya Memorial Museum. A very impressive museum. Now, Nakahara Chuya, 1907 to 1937, he died at the age of 29, was one of the most gifted and colorful of Japan's early modern poets, a bohemian romantic. His death at the early age of 29, coupled with the delicacy of his imagery, have led him to be compared to the greatest of French symbolist poets. He's often called the Japanese Rimbaud. Chuya was the eldest son of the family which owned the Nakahara Hospital in Yuda Hot Springs. He was surrounded by careerism and the cult of success. Chuya's grandfather was a devout Catholic and arranged funds to purchase the land for the Francis Xavier Memorial in Yamaguchi. So Chuya was under great pressure to inherit the family hospital business. However, his deep interest was in literature. And so he left home at the age of 16, first going to Kyoto and then on to Tokyo, where his poems were published and experimental music groups started to use his lyrics. Sadly, so many of his poems reflect his homesickness for Yamaguchi. In this famous photo, he appears as a rebel. His Boston hat brim is turned up, his hair is long, and the collar of his jacket is also turned up, which is the sign of a rebel. Now, Circus is one of those poems known for its song-like eloquence. And I'll read in English. For a number of eras, there was a brown war. For a number of eras, a gale blew in winter. For a number of eras, here tonight, a drinking party. Here tonight, a drinking party. There is a high beam in the circus tent, just one trapeze, an invisible trapeze, under soiled canvas of the big top. Head down, arms dangling, seesaw, see and saw, close to which white light exhales the word cheap ribbon. The audience are a bunch of sardines, throats gurgle, oyster shells, seesaw, see and saw. Outside is dark, dark, on dark, night waning forever, with nostalgia for the damned parachutes, seesaw, see and saw. So I'd argue that the brown war and winter are metaphors for his past struggles and disappointments. But tonight we forget all that, we party. And from this party, the viewpoint becomes that of the circus performer. I think the author is the performer, spotlit, but it's a poor, out-of-the-way circus, perhaps in Yamaguchi. Does the trapeze artist really exist? Perhaps it's just a vision of the author himself, and the performer looks like a ribbon of light. He uses onomatopoeia again, see, saw, see, and saw. And, I think this is reflecting the author's wavering mental state. The voices of the crowd are like oyster shells chattering away with the critical tone, the criticism that he received from his hometown. But still, outside the tent, we see the nostalgia he has for his home town. Now, these lyrics have been used in famous songs in Japan. This one by the very famous Komuro Hitoshi. Nakahara Chuya Circus. One final poem is his famous Hitotsu no Meruhen, or a fairy tale. I'll read the original before reading my translation. And even from the Japanese, hopefully you'll get an idea of the song-like quality of his poems, although I'm not a very good poem reader. Aki no yo wa haruka no kanata ni koishi bakari no kawara ga atte, sore ni hi wa sarasara to sashite iru no de arimashita. 火といってもまるで形跡か何かのようで、非常な個体の雲閥のようでさればこそさらさらと、かすかな音を立ててもいるのでした。さて、小石の上に今しも一つの蝶が止まり、淡い、それでいてくっきりとした影を落としているのでした。やがてその蝶が見えなくなると、いつの間にか今まで流れてもいなかった川床に水はさらさらと流れているのでありました。So my very poor translation is a fairy tale. On an autumn night in a country far away, a riverbed dry and stony, upon which the sun whispered, an unmistakable whisper. I say the sun, but the sun was like hard silica, a lump of dense powder, and for that very reason it whispered an almost imperceptible sound. And just then a butterfly rested on the stony riverbed, its shadow blurred, but then sharp as it rested. When the butterfly eventually disappeared, the river, which had not flowed, ran with water, whispering and whispering. So my interpretation is that this is the country far away is his hometown of Yamaguchi, and there is actually a river through the town that usually runs dry. So it's this nostalgia for his hometown. After the butterfly touches down for a moment, the river runs with water, providing sustenance to the author by coming back to his hometown. All right. Now, there are plenty of places to stay in Yamaguchi, but all of them in Yuda Hot Springs. My favorite is Shiki no Yado, a very comfortable hotel with excellent hot spring waters. Now, we jump back to 1604 when the Mori were defeated in the Great Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. Now, as defeated warriors, the Mori were pushed back to the Choshu domain first, and then were forced even further away over the Chugoku mountain range, away from Edo, increasing the costs of maintaining their domain, keeping them poor. And they had to build a brand new capital in the sleepy fishing port of Hagi. The Hagi Okan Highway was built to allow the Mori family feudal lords to undertake their annual journey to Edo to pay their respects to the Tokugawa shogun. Now, the highway was 4 meters wide, and the steeper sections had stone paving called ishidatami. Now, on the left-hand side there, leaving Hagi, the main post towns were Akiragi, and then up to Sasanami, where we'll stay the night, and then over the highest point at Itado Pass at 517 meters. So it's a considerable climb, and then down, all the way to Yamaguchi, where the feudal lord would stay the night, and then on to the port at Mitajiri to get his boat up to Osaka. It's a very pleasant 2-day walk from Yamaguchi all the way across to Hagi. Now, most of the highway has been preserved beautifully from Yamaguchi to Hagi. There are 42 switchbacks up on that steep section up to a midpoint post town, which was used just for resting. And this rest point has been recreated based on very accurate diagrams of the structure, and it even includes the 2 rest areas for the feudal lord's palanquins, his palanquin and his backup palanquin. Along the way, you'll see interesting places like this ice-cold water spring called Kinchijimi Springs. The water gushes from frigid rocks and is extremely cold. And the locals would make tokoroten, or agar jelly strips, using this cold water. And they sold the refreshing jellies to travelers with a choice of soy sauce or sugar-flavored coatings. And this continued until about 1910 on this highway. This is up near the top of the pass, and is in fact the border between the Suo and Nagato provinces, which were the two major provinces of Choshu. And our first day of walking comes to an end at the post town of Sasanami, which is about 13 kilometers from Yamaguchi. So not very far, but remembering you've had this steep ascent. The only accommodation in town is above the old Hayashiya tofu store. And the rooms above are very comfortable. The dinner is a simple cleansing meal of rice and mountain vegetables and 4 ways of serving tofu, including skewered tofu steak with burdock root, you see there, compressed tofu with skin and simmered vegetables on the top left there, fresh tofu sprinkled with ginger and shallots or scallions, and deep fried tofu skin on the top right there, and a small serving of sashimi. And afterwards, a delicious tofu dessert is also provided. Across the road is the tourist center and rest area. It's the old Kobayashi home, which was the post town's mokudaisho. And this was the transport office. They arranged a change of horses and palanquins and luggage forwarding. Sasanami had 30 horses and 20 palanquins available, so it was a busy highway. Sorry. And you're welcome to enter the tourist center, rest, and they also provide a cup of tea. Our second day of walking takes us 15 kilometers from Sasanami all the way to Hagi. We pass by welcome trail facilities, toilets, interesting old stone bridges from the Edo period, and the famous Taro, the Hagi Okan guard dog. I love this breed, Shiba breed, which is an ancient breed of dog indigenous to Japan. And a handshake is required to be permitted to continue along the highway. I haven't seen Taro for a couple of years through COVID, so I'm looking forward to meeting him in October 2022. We continue on through terraced rice fields. This was my last walk in March 2020, just before COVID shut everything down. So the fields are recovering from winter. A 3-kilometer steep valley called Issho Valley. Issho is actually a packet of fried beans, and it would take the length of the valley to eat the beans, hence the name, Issho Valley. There are sections of Edo period paving, Ishidatami, that survive very well. And this tea house provides, again, a rest facility at Akiragi, which was a post town, but also a major market town. At the river crossing here, there is a monument to Yoshida Shoin, the famous Hagi-based revolutionary thinker. And he wrote in Chinese verse, which is on that poem monument, and my translation is, "As a young man, I pledged my ambitions here at the Akiragi Bridge," as he left his hometown to go up to Edo, seeking information about the shogunate. He actually tries to get on Commodore Perry's boat and sail to America, and this activity sees him executed later. I pay homage and learn from the actions of the ancient esteemed poet Sima Jiangru, who also pledged his ambitions as a young man at the bridge to his hometown. Today, despite returning in shackles, I return to my hometown bathed in glory. So he's returning to be executed. Now, Yoshida was born in Hagi in 1830, executed at the age of 29 under shogunate orders. But he was one of Japan's most distinguished intellectuals in the closing years of the Tokugawa shogunate. He devoted himself to nurturing many ishin shishi, or restoration men of high purpose, many of whom would go on to make major contributions to the Meiji Restoration and the new democratic Meiji government. Our walk continues. Past another resting place for the feudal lord and his palanquins, through some Meiji period tunnels, which made walking easier. This was for foot traffic. And then finally, to a rest facility with a restaurant, cafe, and toilets, and an interesting museum dedicated to Yoshida Shoin. Outside, you can see a number of bronze statues of his key students and participants in the Meiji Restoration movement. It's not far from here now to the city of Hagi. You can see Mount Sashitsuki, which stands out, and at its base is Hagi Castle. All that remains are the impressive stone foundations today. And the Hagi Okan terminates at the Karahi public notice board, which is just in front of the central bus center. This type of notice board was located at the entrance to post towns and was the main method for which the warrior class communicated laws and notifications to the common class. My suggested accommodation is the Hagi Komachi Inn. It's out towards Mount Kasayama, which is an interesting shield volcano with rare camellia native forests. And it's a wonderful mountain to explore. Would take a day to walk all over the mountain and the camellia forests. The hot springs of the inn look out over the bay, as does the dining room. Very close by is, that's the view from the top of the Shield volcano, actually. Now, just nearby is the location of Yoshida Shoin's private school, the Shoka Sonjuku Academy, and that's the actual academy itself. It stands now inside the Shoin Shrine, which is dedicated to the memory of Yoshida Shoin. He's been deified. It is the original location of the school, Yoshida's home, and where he was held captive. The size of the academy is just 50 square meters. It's an 8-mat room, a 10-mat room, and a 1-mat earthen floor. Now, one of his key students, Ito Hirobumi, who becomes prime minister, his birth home is just next door. Ito Hirobumi lived here until 1868, when he went up and became part of the first year of the Meiji government in full operation. Now, right next door, they've also relocated Ito Hirobumi's villa from Tokyo. Now, the villa was constructed by Meiji-era temple architect Ito Mansaku and features traditional designs such as the single wooden board ceiling of the banquet hall and the joint ceiling of the detached room. Ito Hirobumi is the most famous of all the Yamaguchi Meiji Restoration warriors. As I mentioned, born in Hagi, he attended the Shoka Sonjuku School. He joined the Sonno Joi movement, the Revere the Emperor, Expel Foreigners movement, and was chosen as one of the Choshu Five who secreted out of Japan, and illegally they studied at University College London in 1863. But his experience in London led him to realize that Japan needed to adopt Western technology. He was then part of the Iwakura mission, which was a formalized mission from the Meiji government of leading government members, which toured the world studying political systems and technology. He went back to Europe in 1882 to study constitutions, spending 18 months away from Japan. He'd become Japan's first prime minister on the 22nd of December, 1885. His second term as prime minister was 1892 to 1896. He supported the first Sino-Japanese war, and he negotiated the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which was the peace treaty with China, whereby China recognized the independence of Korea and ceded Taiwan to Japan. After Japan's success in the Russo-Japanese War, the Japan-Korea Treaty was signed, and Korea became a Japanese protectorate, and Ito became the first resident general of Korea. He was against radical annexation of Korea, but later acquiesced to the full annexation of Korea. His assassination at Harbin on 26 October 1909 accelerated the Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty of 1910, which started a very sad period of history for both countries. So we might be looking for lunch by about this time, and a wonderful lunch option is Hotori Te, right in the center of the old castle town. Noren curtains guard the entrance to this private home. They've got the name of the restaurant emblazoned on them, Hotori Te, which means the house on the river bank. The cafe is famous for its garden, and one's very well, after you make your order for lunch, you're very welcome to stroll the garden. This was the family's former living room. It's now where you eat lunch. Now, the cafe is owned by Mr. Sadao Yoshi. He prefers to be known as Sam. He worked with a general trading company in Australia and Ireland. So, of course, after retirement, he turned his wife's family home into an Irish pub and our wonderful garden cafe. It's undergoing renewal at the moment. It should be finished about now, and his son is going to take over the business. Sam is very proud of his very healthy lunches, but he makes a very excellent coffee as well. So after that sustenance, let's explore the castle town that surrounds Hotori Te. The streetscape is really wonderful to stroll through. But first, just around the corner is the impressive Kikuya residence, which is a merchant home. The Kikuya were very wealthy merchants and official suppliers to the Mori clan. The family moved to Hagi in 1604 when the Mori clan established their new capital here, and they cooperated with the building of the new castle town, and so were rewarded richly with a location in the center of town in what is known as the Gofukucho area. You can see how far back the property extends, but at the front is the all-important shop front. And this is the accounting space, the most important part of the house. An earthen floor extends the entire west side of the house. And further inside, there are 3 rooms located in 3 columns, which all overlook the wonderful garden. The back of the house faces south, so the sun reaches the extensive gardens. This is the amazing hand basin for tea ceremonies, designed so that hands can be washed while standing on the veranda. Now, Shiba Ryotaro also wrote about the garden, and my translation is, I saw the sophisticated, buoyant sense of beauty held by the people of Choshu when looking at the Choshu gardens, which are designed to turn towards the sun, and when abstracting the design of their residences. It is as if I am viewing the structure of the domain's politics and economics. Furthermore, when looking at the miraculous way in which the Kikuya residence has survived the centuries, I feel a visit here is essential to understanding a much broader idea of what it is to be Japanese. Close by is the birth home of Takasugi Shinsaku, born in 1939. This is the well, I beg your pardon, born in 1839, that should be. This is the well which was used for his first wash. He started studying at the Shoka Sonjuku private school in 1857. Sorry, born in 1839. Now, he's important because he was responsible for establishing the Kiheitai militia, which would fight in the wars to overthrow the shogunate. The Kido residence is nearby. Kido Takayoshi was one of the 3 great nobles of the Meiji Restoration, alongside Saigo Takamori and Okubo Toshimichi. Kido also studied at the Shoka Sonjuku private school and would go on to supervise the construction of Choshu's first Western-style warship. He was responsible for negotiating the alliance with the Satsuma clan. In the new Meiji government, he abolished all the domains and established prefectures. So we have Japan's geography today to thank for him. He accompanied the Iwakura mission overseas and helped establish Japan's world-class education system. I like him because he stopped an early invasion plan of Japan, early invasion plan of Korea. He was a high-minded gentleman. Back in Yamaguchi City, he's deified as a god of scholarship, and he has a shrine dedicated to him. Now, we'll finish with mention of Hagi's famous pottery. A ceramics-focused visit starts at the Hagi Shiryokan, or Hagi Yaki Pottery Museum. Hagi Yaki commenced in Hagi in 1604 under the orders of the feudal lord Mori Terumoto. Now, when Toyotomi Hideyoshi invaded Korea in the late 16th century, large numbers of Korean craftsmen were abducted to Japan, and Terumoto ordered 2 brothers from the Lee family to establish a kiln in Hagi to create ceramics for use in tea ceremony and for gifts. And these 2 families who have descended from these beginnings are the Saka and the Miwa families. The Lee Kei family was renamed Saka Kyuzaemon by the feudal lord in 1625, and the Saka family became the central kiln in Hagi. Now, the 12th generation's sister-in-law became the 13th generation. She was the first female head. She's pictured here, but she sadly passed in 2014. The 14th generation, as of 2020, has not yet been appointed, but the oldest son of the 12th generation, Sakayuta, is actively making pottery and is hoping to take over the family business. And here he is Saka Yuta. So that's the family's wonderful Noborigama or climbing kiln. Now, the Saka kiln is open for visits, but it's best to call ahead and ask for permission. The home's about 3.8 kilometers from central Hagi, and you'll see that large multi-chambered climbing kiln that we saw in the video, and the family garden is also impressive. And the very well-known Australian ceramicist Paul Davis studied here and included Yuta's works in a recent exhibition in Mittagong in 2022. The Saka produce works in the hime or princess style of Hagi, which has very thin, delicate glazes. This is a tea caddy with an ivory lid and a tea bowl. In tea ceremony, Hagi is one of the top 3 rated kilns. The old adage going raku first, Hagi second, karatsu third. And the other famous Hagi family is the Miwa family. Like Saka Kyuzaemon, the name of the head potter of the Miwa family is always Miwa Kyusetsu. And the current generation is the 13th generation. The Miwa kiln was established in the 1660s. The 10th and 11th generations were living national treasures. And the current 13th generation is the son of the 11th generation. And he's known for his individual bold forms, including the tea bowl El Capitan, after the rock climbing location in the USA. White Hagi was developed by the Miwa family, and the Miwa use rice straw ash to create this white glaze, which is porous, and the tea bowls actually patina over time. They need to be used very, very carefully. This is a bold water container for tea ceremony. And the 11th generation, Kyusetsu, 1910 to 2012, was a living national treasure. The 11th generation Kyusetsu mixed clay with sand to give a coarse and earthy feel. He then applied a thick white ash glaze that he called Oni Hagi or Devil Hagi. Conspicuously different to the hime Hagi style with its smooth, thin glazes. His work features a warikodai or split cross foot ring, which allows the bowls to be tied and carried. Now, this store, no relation to the Miwa kiln, is the longest established Hagi ware pottery store in Hagi, and it's enthusiastically managed by Mr. Miwa Masatomo. Again, no relation to the pottery family. Masatomo was born in 1970 into the oldest pottery store in Hagi, and he's the 4th generation of his family store, and he loves you to drop by. You might get a cup of tea in a priceless tea bowl. if you get on well. All right. Thank you so much for your time and for visiting Yamaguchi with me today.